Good afternoon, all. Today I want to talk about a movie that I had heard of but actually never saw, probably because it's a British movie, and I didn't see a lot of movies from the UK, at the time. This was released in 1963. I was only 4 years old. But I might have seen it on television once, but if so, I didn't remember it because it's really, really good, and I'm really very surprised at the high quality of this movie, which is called Unearthly Stranger. It's a British movie made in, like I said, 1963. It's in black and white, and it stars John Neville, rather, Philip Stone, Gabriella Licudi, Patrick Newell, and a very young and very beautiful Jean Marsh, who I was always rather smitten with. Even more so when I found out that she had red hair. But I always liked her. A fantastic actress, very, very talented. And it's written by Rex Carlton from a story by Jeffrey Stone, and directed by John Krish, who I had not heard of. One of the critics of this film called it a quote-unquote male-voiced "I Married a Monster from Outer Space," and that's not entirely wrong. There are also some kind of echoes of Village of the Damned, written famously by John Wyndham, from John Wyndham's novel The Midwich Cuckoos, and it has an equally kind of a creepy vibe, and some might even say it's kind of a precursor to the Stepford Wives, only reversed. It's the women who are menacing, not the men. But there's kind of an interesting story. It's about a scientist played by John Neville, works at the Institute for Space Research, which is somewhere in rural England. It's not London, it's somewhere out in the suburbs. And what they're trying to do, and this is interesting, they're trying to create a way that men can project their minds into outer space, not travel in a spaceship, but travel to outer space by projecting their minds into outer space using some sort of mathematical formula that both the British and the Americans and the Soviets are apparently all working on. And interestingly enough, scientists from all three countries have mysteriously died. And the predecessor to John Neville's character, the head of the project, dies. And we don't really, you see it, but you don't really see anything obvious. He dies, hears this horrible noise, and the noise kind of surrounds him, and then you see just a very bright light in his face. He makes a horrified look and just dies from apparently a brain hemorrhage. That reminded me a little bit of the method of death used by the alien characters in the American TV series The Invaders, but that wasn't until many years later. So this is actually before that. All of these scientists who died apparently have had brain hemorrhages. And the scientist's body is hidden by the head of security of this company, who is played by Patrick Newell. Plays this kind of a little bit of a gay stereotype, but a sort of a very concerned head of security who he's always like munching on something, and he's curious about what happened. He somehow squirrels away the professor's body and hides it, puts bricks in his coffin, and tears up his scientific notes disappear, and nobody understands why. Nobody understands what happened. Now John Neville is the head of the project, and he starts showing concern that his wife, who he met in Switzerland only a few months before he took this job at this institute, is exhibiting some strange symptoms. Like, she sleeps with her eyes completely open. He says that to his colleague, played by Philip Stone, that as says Professor Lancaster, his name is, says, she sleeps with her eyes open. I took her pulse and she didn't have any. And he says, and she never blinks. She never blinks her eyes. And he says, oh, you're just exaggerating, all these things. He said, no, come to dinner and I'll show you. He takes him home to dinner, and they have a very nice domestic life. They're obviously, a young couple in love, and she's very beautiful, and show him this dinner, and everything's going fine until Neville asks the professor to get a corkscrew so he can open a bottle of wine for them with dinner. He says, though, the corkscrew's in the kitchen drawer. He goes into the kitchen and sees John Neville's wife reaching into the stove and pulling out the stove is at 275 degrees Fahrenheit, and pulls out a casserole dish with her bare hands and isn't burned, doesn't seem to notice the effect whatsoever. And then she later comes out with the casserole dish holding holding oven mitts and puts it on the table. And he doesn't say anything about this. He doesn't say anything about what happens. During the dinner, everything's going fine, and she is, in fact, blinking her eyes quite a bit. And so he thinks, maybe he just hallucinated the whole thing. Well, they go back to work, and the major, who is played by the security officer, played by Patrick Newell, is starting to show concern about Neville's wife because he can't find any background information on her. When he looks up her background, it seems like she didn't even exist before she met Neville. And he's like, "Oh, that's ridiculous. You're just exaggerating." And he says, "Well, I'm sorry, but for the security's sake, I'm going to have to take you off the project. You're not fired. You can still work in your office, but you have to work on non-security matters only." He says, "Why? It's ridiculous. She's not a spy or anything." Well, he doesn't know that, obviously, and he thinks maybe she is a spy and maybe she's working for the Soviets. And, they don't have any proof because they can't find any background on her. Well, things start to escalate, and the major goes home. You see a couple of odd scenes, and this is where it's kind of reminiscent of I Married a Monster from Outer Space. She walks past a window where there's I guess it's a nursery, or there's a baby, and the baby starts crying when it sees her uncontrollably. And then she becomes very upset, and she starts crying. You see that the tears kind of like etch acid lines into her face, like they're actually burning her. And then she goes to a schoolyard, and little kids are playing, and they're having a great time and jumping around. And again, they see her, they all start backing away from her like she's some sort of a monster. And, she's this beautiful woman. There's nothing monstrous about her at all. And then she becomes upset. She goes back home, and she's starting to become concerned about John, her husband. And we don't really know why at that point. Then the major comes to interview her, and he also comments on some odd things. He says that, there seemed to be pits underneath her eyes where she was crying, and they're actually like physical. At this point, Neville puts forth a very wild theory, which he tells to Professor Lancaster. He says, what are we doing here? We're trying to project our minds into outer space to land on another planet without actually physically going there. And to do so, we'd have to know, what if on that other planet they didn't breathe oxygen? Or what if on that other planet they didn't have 2 arms and 2 legs? We had to turn ourselves into some sort of different being to actually exist on that planet, even as a mental projection. He said, what if someone else has done it first? And to come to Earth and to live on Earth, they'd have to breathe our air. They'd have to look like us. They would have to assimilate into our society. What if they're just, illusions? They're not real people. They're something from somewhere else that looks like us but isn't us. And he said, I never heard you say anything that wild. And, how did you come up with this? And he says, I don't have anything concrete, but... And that's when the professor tells him what he saw at dinner, that she took out a red-hot casserole dish, out of the oven without being burned, and that a normal person would have received third-degree burns. And she didn't, and he can't explain it. Eventually, we find out that his wife is in fact, she confesses that she is in fact an alien. When she met him in Switzerland, she had been assigned to kill him because he knows about this formula, the formula that will allow human beings to go to other planets without actually physically leaving the Earth. And she says, we can't let you do that. because you're too violent and you would cause a lot of destruction, and you have to stay here. We can't let you go anywhere else. But something failed because they're going to come after me now because I didn't kill you and I fell in love with you, and we're not supposed to have any emotions. But because I took this shape, I took on emotion, and we're not, that's illegal. We're not supposed to do it. And he says, oh, don't worry, they can't cuff us. And then we start hearing that eerie noise again that we heard in the first scene where the previous head of the project was killed, apparently by a brain hemorrhage, by some horrendous external force. One of the nice things about this movie, it never actually shows you the alien. You don't see a spacecraft. You don't see aliens with any non-humanoid forms. All you see here is this bizarre noise, which is really kind of very, very creepy. And he's telling, she's becoming very upset. Julie is his wife's name. And he says, oh, Julie, don't worry, they can't come for you if we're together. And they run up towards, she starts to run away and says, I don't want you to die when they come to kill me. You have to stay away from me. And he says, don't be ridiculous. They can't kill us both if we're together. They run up into the attic, and they do come for her. This noise comes for her, and all of a sudden, he had been holding her, and when he looks up, there's nothing in his arms except an empty dress. She's completely disappeared, and he freaks out. He runs to the office with this horrendous sound kind of following him. He makes a tape recording of his experiences to tell people basically what happened to him. And as he's ending this tape recording, telling them what became of his wife, and that there are these strange creatures who look exactly like us but aren't us, here, and that they're trying to stop people from going to outer space. Jean Marsh, who's his secretary, comes in and says, I'm very sorry about what happened to Julie, but now I'm going to have to finish her job. And she's one of them too. And that's really scary. She starts to advance towards him, but he and the professor comes in and they start struggling with her, trying to hold her off, trying to break her concentration, basically, which they do. And then she accidentally slips through a window transom and screams and, falls down to the street. But when they get to the street, they run down this really creepy set of spiral staircase, and the cinematography of that is just great, because it shows a spiraling, descending camera. You're descending through the spiral staircase. I thought that was really well done, very film noir-ish. And you end up in the street, and again, the only thing that's there is an empty dress. There's no Jean Marsh, again, because she had told them, we've been here for 20 years, and there are hundreds of us, and we're not going to let you go to outer space. You can't stop us. And as they're looking at with awe and shock at this empty dress where Jean Marsh was, all these other women start crowding in on them, and any of them might be one of them also, and you get kind of really a very creepy ending, they're all closing in. I thought it was terrific. I thought the cinematography is fantastic and well directed, well written, well acted. A great science fiction movie that has almost no special effects, but proves that you can do it. You can do a psychological thriller like this without having, a huge budget, which obviously this movie doesn't. But again, John Neville is a Shakespearean-trained actor, and he really does a terrific job, as do, the supporting characters of Philip Stone, Gabriella Licudi, and particularly Patrick Newell was great as this menacing, somewhat gay major who is the security officer, who's trying to keep all this stuff from the public. He's known about it. He just doesn't want the public to know about it. And, of course, Jean Marsh as the apparently empty-headed secretary who's anything but, and turns out to be rather menacing at the end. I thought it was terrific, and it's really creepy. It gave me a nightmare, and that's how creepy it was. For 1963, really, really excellent science fiction movie. I highly recommend it. Again, Unearthly Stranger from 1963. Well worth watching.